Hello, everybody. Just getting this set up here. My name is Sam Guiana, and we are on Interactive Mix Live Breakdown. Yeah, cool. Today, I am breaking down one of my favorite songs, probably ever, not even just something I've recorded. This song is called Very Long List by a band called Northbound. They are from Florida. And Jon, the songwriter slash main dude in the band, is hands down, in my opinion, one of the most talented songwriters I've ever worked with. You may have caught me working or showing this song off a little bit before the YouTube move. I was trying it out, and I thought to myself that this is such a good song with just enough interesting little things happening to really dive into. Even though it's such a simple song, there's such great little things happening constantly in it, and it's an example of just a very great song. So again, that's the band Northbound. Song's called Very Long List, and yeah, let's take a quick listen before we dive into it.
I just wanna feel alive for the first time in my life. I wanna see you in the limelight, girl. I want you with me all the time. 'Cause if we get sober, we'll never get old until we die. And I should've told ya, I feel like I've known you my whole life. Where's that sense of adventure? Screaming, one hand on your lap, one hand on the feeling. As I get older, the chip on my shoulder's hard to hide. And as I get older, the child within me starts to die. And if you asked me to stay, I'd be leading with this. You're on a very long list of the things that I miss, so won't you hold me like you did that night? Maybe I know otherwise.
Yeah, such a good song. One of my absolute favorite songs ever, honestly. All right, so this was a fun little project for me. So I'm going to give you a bit of the backstory on this record. A mutual friend slash the manager of my old band, who managed Jon's band at the time, hit me up and was like, listen, I need you to do this record. Pretty much no questions asked. And I was like, okay. And he told me what the band was, and I'd happened to know of the band already and was a pretty big fan. So I said, yes, absolutely. I'm 100% down. Sorry, hang on one sec, guys. I'm going to turn my mic up. I'm 100% down to do this. Let's do it. The record almost fell through literally 3 days before we started. And the record definitely had its fair share of wonky stuff happening throughout it. But honestly, it was one of the best experiences I've ever had making a record with one of my favorite songwriters I've had to work with to date. So that's the backstory. It was very tough to pick a song on this record because I friggin' love every song on this record. And yeah. So one thing I want to talk about before I start is I've noticed a lot of people asking about specific samples. Normally I print my samples down in sessions, but I'm leaving this one running live so we can actually talk about why I chose the sounds you're hearing as opposed to just, why or just seeing that sample and wondering what it is. So this song had a lot of fun little production things in it. One of the cool things about it, which as you've probably caught on, it's entirely amp sim, which I think is really interesting for a song like this, because if you listen to music in this type of genre, it's very much real rock guitar sound. And my goal with this record, especially because we were sort of on a time frame and everything, was to get all the real rock sound I would want out of a record like this with amp sims. And that's always my goal. I was big on STL tonality at the time, still am. And it was cool. It was something that was fun to play with. Another cool thing is I use CLA vocals on this entire vocal, on the record. And when I wanted different changes, I would actually automate the plugin. So we're going to talk a little bit about automating the plugin in that. All right, we'll start with what we always start with, the master bus here. So the master bus on this song was Slate VCC being set to API, which is always good for like transient-y stuff, and a little bit of what I normally do for some bus boosting, as well as FG Gray doing its thing, auto, because it was a bit of a slower tempoed song. I didn't want the drums to be clamped down by fast attack, fast release. I really wanted that like openness sound. So you'll see that this compressor is doing a lot of work, but really it's just there to kind of, it's just there to, you know, keep the whole mix glued nicely. These were probably options I was playing around with, and I always have VTM at some point and then kill it. And then I printed this with Slate FGX on the way on the final mix. I might have actually undone that for the master because I think the guy who mastered it asked me to. And yeah. So let's dive into the drums a little bit. The drums on this record were played by a dude named Seb, and he was a friggin' beast. He was hands down one of my favorite drummers I've ever recorded. He hit like a machine. He took notes super well when we were changing stuff on the fly. And it basically, when you have a drummer like him, it makes every tone on the record so easy to work with. So you'll hear that there's, you know, a decent amount of snare sample going on, but not much kick sample and tons of actual room. So let's take a listen to the drums a little bit. One of my favorite drum sounds I've ever gotten out of my place. And I always talk about how my room kind of sucks, but it's one of those things that when you've got like a incredible drummer in the, you know, behind the kit, like a guy who just annihilates what he's doing, but properly, it's so beneficial to the sound. Oh, hey, Justin. Stoked you're here to actually catch one live. All right, let's dive into this. So I did a ton of room mics, and I think I was just trying to do a bunch of different stuff because I wanted a roomy sound on this record. So I did a stereo pair of rooms with ribbon mics. Sounds like this. More of like a gluey room than anything. I was stereo rooming my hall at the time, which I don't do anymore. I do a mono in the hall, but it adds it adds so much to the drum sound. It's ridiculous. And then a mono that kind of just puts everybody in its place. I'm not mistaken, that mono's probably facing the back corner of the room, facing upwards. I tend to do that in my room because it's a fairly reflective spot. It makes the cymbals, and it basically gives like a good picture of the drums on the way in that I can just blend in nicely with, say, the overheads. I don't know if you could really hear it there. I'm going to try to turn this up a little bit. But it basically fills in the space of every, like, it fills in what the overheads are missing. Let's take a listen. It's cool because that spot in the room for some reason just doesn't give a lot of extra shine or anything like that. It just almost acts like an overhead even though it's so far away. Kick was probably the D6 in, and this song has a lot of real kick in it. Helps when a guy's playing really consistent. You can even see, like, obviously I hit this I hit this with compression, but the goal at the end of the day was to, you know, obviously have it played as even as possible. And then the snare drum, which sounds a little wonky on its own, but it's adding a lot of transient. One cool thing about this song that I'm excited to talk about too is I didn't do any extra like room mic adding or fake room mics on the toms, and I think that the toms sound so great on this record. Yeah, the toms are 100% real on this record, and they're just hit really well, tuned really low and thuddy, which I love. Helps when you have a dude just friggin' mangling the kit. I've got a really long kick drum. The studio kick is 22 by 20 CNC drum that has a bit of a, it sounds how it looks is the easiest way to put it. Like a little bit of a cannon-y sound. I've got one pillow that actually takes up most of the space between the two, so it's touching both heads. And that's about it in that kick drum, and I find that that's like the perfect amount of muffling for that kick drum. There's times where I honestly hate that kick drum so much, but it's weird. Every time I want to get it cut down, I'm scared that if I cut it down, I'm going to be bummed. So I just leave it as is because it's been on so many records and just sounds so good. It's at home with everything. Yeah, that VMR gate is really good. In fact, I'm going to talk about the VMR gate quickly. So when I trigger drums, I make little blips. And if you look, you see like the little blip. It looks like the snare, but it's sort of like less. I make these with that slate gate, actually. I've got a preset. Where's the gate? I'm not going to turn on the preset. I'm just going to... Actually, maybe I'll turn on the preset. It's funny. This one's called Trig Maker because that's the preset, but it's actually different. It looks more like... Actually, you know what? I'm going to pick it, and then we'll go back. Oh, that is the trigger. Okay, so with this gate, if you set it to similar settings to this, where you get a very quick grab on the gate, and then turn on the transients listen button, you get just that little snap of the snare there. And if you render that in place, I'm just going to freeze up to this. If you render that in place, you get these little blips. Just these perfect little chunks of snare that are fairly short. And you can pretty much use that as an accurate trigger track. You might have to go through manually and clean up a few and, you know, check where it's missing little ghosts and stuff like that, which I did. Like, see down here, it didn't have the two little ghost notes, and up here I had to make them. But it's a very fast, efficient, and accurate way to get a clean track with which to trigger off. NB gate. I'm still set. Set on listen there. Funny enough, I would change the settings on this gate these days to be a little more like this. Just opening up that snare a little bit more is really nice. Yeah, so Seb made, 90% of this drum sound. He's, a lot of that is in the hands when it comes to big fills and things. One thing I did is I'm always known to put a lot of tambourine and stuff. This song is no exception. In fact, I have a tambourine running the entire song. I wanted this record to be very percussive in like a fun way. And in one of the ways I accomplished that was in, slower tempo songs, having a tambourine run through the whole time. Well, I want to take a listen to this tambourine because it dips down in the verses, comes back up for the bigger parts. But also, I want to show you something I do with a mono tambourine that really helps it sit in the mix. What I'm doing here is this little bit of a doubler. I'm actually only using one of the two channels on the doubler. And what I'm doing with that is basically using the doubler as a way to widen the tambourine and brighten the tambourine. So you've got the direct one, pan to the right, because I always like my tambourines on the right. And the fake double, pan to the left and dipped about 7 to 10 dB. I usually play with this number a bit. What it does is it makes it sound less like you're hearing just one tambourine pan to the side and more like you're hearing this kind of like tambo in a room. Even though I still send it to a bit of reverb, if we look, it's going to the main drum verb with everything else. But it's a good way to like widen out the tambourine without it sounding wide. And in faster tambourines, like this song had a good tempo for a fast tambourine in the chorus. I get asked a lot about tambourines. I don't ever play them. This is from a pack of a company called That Sound. They make really good really good organic percussion, and they've got tons of tambourine loops in tons of different tempos and things like that. So I'll usually go in, I'll grab the closest tempo that is slower, and then speed it up to the right thing, usually manually by chopping it. And then in songs where, like the snare's not on the one and these loops come sort of in 4/4 loops, I'll go in and paste the tambourines around, as you can see here, to sort of like make that happen. Yeah, the room sound was super important. I'm gonna show you what this sounds like with and without the rooms going on, because these rooms are playing into the mix of the drums so much. It's a really subtle change, but it's an important one for sure. It really makes, fills in that drum sound in a nice way. And a lot of times I don't want all that room sound, but the energy on a song like this was really important. All right, so a lot of people, like I was saying, wanted to know about samples. I want to talk about these samples a little bit. So in older sessions of mine, I've got two snares running. And the reason for this is I've got one that is here basically to keep everything as close to the real snare as possible. We'll take a listen to that with the real snare. So here's the real snare. And I've got this sample in there that's just dry and kind of boring sounding on purpose. And that is just to even out the real snare. It's not there to be a snare sample per se. So even without that, there's still a lot of the real snare going on in there. And then this is sort of like stylized sample, has a bit of room in it to extend those fake rooms. And but look at it, I'm not even doing anything to, oh yeah, I'm sucking out a little bit of 1K. That's it. I'm not even boosting low end. Normally I boost low end on these snares and then getting rid of like an annoying ring. But this is because this is sort of a background snare that's less important. Even though the fader's up higher than the other snare, it's there to just add width to everything. And on the original snare, yeah, boosting a ton of top end, taking out sort of the same thing, Boosting just a little bit of low. It's funny. You always see people. Oh, I want to talk about transient designer. I'm actually boosting the attack of the low end with a transient designer and sucking out a ton of the sustain in the mid range. This snare sample, I guess, was very like wide and gross, and I wanted to get rid of that. Let's take a listen without it, actually. Oh my God. It sounds awful without that transient designer in there. And then, of course, Arouser doing its arousal. What hat mic do I use? Let's see. Let's see if I had it. I didn't write it down. There's a really good chance the hat and ride mics on this. The hat mic was probably an SM7B. And the ride mic was probably AKG 451. But you can see, like, they're just peppered in the mix. They're only there just to add a little bit of extra character. They're through more of the cleaner pre's on my rig, and that's just... I don't put a lot of stock into hat and ride mic choices. I more just want them there in case I need them. You see that killing it there for a sec. It makes a bit of a difference to the hi-hats, but really, if I killed them in the mix, I think the overheads are providing enough for me. Kick trigger was probably just, like a kick one with a bit of extra room going on. And that's just in there. If you listen when I'm gonna play the kick drum with and without the sample, and you're gonna see that the sample's there. Just like that first snare sample, it's just there to like keep some consistency. But the main tone of this kick drum was totally real kick drum. Yeah, like a little bit of even low end, and especially with that room in there, it just makes that kick a little wider sounding. Overheads on this were KM84s, like my favorite overhead mics. Doing a lot of cleanup because like I sort of hate the resonances in my room. Plus these cymbals were really big, which I love big cymbals, but they can get a little unruly. So it's really you have to be really careful with that. I'm gonna go to the chorus of this where we've got some crashes and rides going on. Yeah, so you see that is a literal cleanup job. I'm not using these overheads to do anything spectacular to the actual core sound. I mean, there's a super small shelf up here and this sort of like dip, but this is just getting rid of tons and tons of resonances and, just annoying stuff that I didn't want to hear in the overheads that when I would listen on the full mix, I'd be like, what is causing that sound? And then you kind of go in and you hone in and you get rid of it. No, I don't tune samples. What I'll do is just I'll use my ear to try to find samples that sound the same. Here, there was this Ludwig Vista light. Oh, hang on. The last one I think is a supernatural mode. I think this might be a Slate sample. Yeah, Slate Classic. There you go. It was a later edition. I remember I wanted just the two dark sounding ones, but I wanted a bit of a ring in this because I think the real snare had that ring kind of going on. Yeah, you hear that going on in that. And I felt like I was lacking that after I put the sample in. And then on this snare, which is doing a lot of extra ring and width, there's like a bajillion things happening here. Mostly snare dong, of course. The room, actually, of that Black Beauty. And then this old sample, Nash Signature Room, I came from a pack I got a long, long time ago. It always adds this long, almost reverby room. And like you can tuck it in. Like I hear it when it's like at -20, and if I take it out, I'm missing it. But like I'm always like, oh, if it's at -20, why is it in there? But every time I take it out, I miss it. So that makes the core snare sound. But obviously, you know, the overheads and everything have a lot to play into that, especially with you know, parallel compression settings and things. Big goal of this record was, and with every record I work on, is I did not want the drums to sound sampled. Sometimes I do, you know, sometimes I want to sort of lean into a sample because I like the aggression it adds or whatever. This was, I hunted for a sample blend that would just make you feel like you were listening to a real kit through and through. And I think I succeeded with this record. I'm doing a typical snare verb these days on this guy. Studio A, rolling a bit of the low end off. My typical drum room preset here, which is realistic full drum room 2, just tweaked a little bit, a little wider, probably a little bit shorter, and changing the EQ for sure. Cleanup after it, hilarious amount of cleanup. This just comes from when I fly this setting in. I honestly don't make it like this every single time. You've probably seen it a few times like that. And then drum comp, just a good old, you know, CLA smashing away. Funny, every time I mute parallel compression, I feel like I don't need it, but every time I listen to a mix and I'm wondering why drums aren't as exciting, I'm realizing it's because, you know, like the parallel compression is doing so much more than I think it is. One really important thing I did in this song, which added to making the record sound as real as possible in the drum domain, was turning up rooms when they needed to be turned up. So certain fills. I have the room hall turning up because that's my real room sound. And then of course the snare and drum verb coming up as well. It just adds a bit of explosion in the right way. Hearing it in context, I'll play it into this fill here. And if you see right around here, oh, zoomy boy, it goes twice. This is to make this big snare flam, which we're about to hear, really nice and, you know, aggressive in the moment there. It's these little tricks that really make drums pop, and, you know, it's something that the listener doesn't notice just listening, but it is something that you would feel if it were missing, and that's the reason, you know, we make those sorts of moves like that. How important are tape machine plugins? Tape machine plugins are actually very important to my mix. If I have a really harsh source, I will almost always reach for tape head. Like these room ribbons always come out fairly harsh when I track them. I'm gonna kill these quick. I'm gonna find a better part of the song. Give me a sec. Right away, putting that tape head on adds this woof, but not a bad woof. Like, in my opinion anyways, a very nice, like, it turns it from a sterile sound into a very usable room, and then I treat it afterwards. Sometimes I'll put tape head last, like on snares, but I'll reach for tape head to solve a problem and then work off of it like I was working off of tape. That one move alone adds such realness to that, or not realness, but, you know, such a more pleasant sound to the room ribbon microphones. A stupid amount of EQ to get rid of a bunch of mistakes. I have a small drum room, so even though I do these Bloomline ribbon mics, they still have their issues at the end of the day. So this is a massive cleanup job to get rid of that. And then 20-to-1 on rooms is like the magic thing. It always helps. The hallway here has hilarious sounds, especially if people are moving around. So I've got this ridiculous EQ going on. A really great way to make sources sound further away, you'll see it on a lot of my room mics. Probably this one too. Oh no, this one's just, that's why the high end was so tamed on that mono room. Is this sort of shape. You want to lose the top end and the bottom end because that's what gives the illusion of distance in a room mic. And so that's almost always the first thing I start with when I'm working on room mics. Sometimes I'll boost the middle here, but this hallway has a very mid-forward sound, so I'm actually cutting a decent chunk of it. But, you know, sometimes it looks like that. I've learned lately that that hallway is a very important aspect of my drum sound, and I don't think I'll ever do a recording in the studio again without putting at least a mono room in that hallway. D6s are funny mics for kick drums. So a D6 is this very scooped, ready sounding microphone. It still comes with its problems. I reached for FGA. I never use that guy. Yeah, I was trying the API thing on this record. I think that's why I've got the API on VCC and everything, and I wanted to see how it goes. You know, boosting 2 dB at 5 is always like a nice spot for kick drums. Same with the 3K, although I think we're actually a little past. Oh no, we're at 3. And then cutting tons of 3 to 4 is a big thing in kick drums as well. So I probably wanted to treat this like this is how I want the kick drum to sound. Gating it with this slate gate, which is just magical. Hitting it with some arouser, and then doing a bit of cleanup afterwards as well. I wanted it to hit a little harder. I wanted to get rid of whatever noises were bothering me, and I wanted a little bit more attack off of it. You can see it peaks over here, but peaking inside of Pro Tools when bussing happens is not a problem. A red peak is bad. A yellow peak just means, hey, you know, if this wasn't going to a bus, you would have a problem. Again, Transify, really important to watch the sustain on snares. I used to not give a crap about this stuff until I realized that you can eat up way too much space sometimes. So on this, when I tracked it, I wanted more sustain. But then when you looked at the samples, I was taking off a ton of sustain to sort of match the sustain between the real and the fake snare. And like almost doing nothing to this, you know, a bit of boosting on the top and bottom. The snare sounded so great coming on in, and I'm using it just for a lot of transient attack. Adam, the CPU usage on a rouser is hilariously light. Let's have some fun here. Give me a second. Rouser. This is going to sound terrible. Okay. Every single track on this session now has tons of arousers on it. Let's see how it goes.
When we were just 2 kids in a bedroom, both skipping school, you were stealing your mom's pills. We would just lay there and stare at.
So that is a ton of arousers. My fan has started going off. So that's how many arousers you need to set the fan off. I am also running at 512. This computer can generally handle 128. So I'm running now at 128. I'm streaming this to YouTube, and I've got a cajillion arousers, samples running live, tons of amp sims going, and...
Just 2 kids in a bedroom, both skipping school.
This is so stupid sounding with all these arousers. So I think you're safe power-wise to, yeah, even taking off. It added 10% to my overall CPU usage, putting on all those ridiculously stupid arousers. It's my favorite plugin. That's the only reason I went into that little bit of a hilarious demonstration there. Is this a newer iMac? No, this is a 2013 3.5 with 24 gigs of RAM going on. I've had this computer for basically since late 2013. I bought it brand new. I have been looking to upgrade lately, but it still does the trick. It runs a little slow with neural plugins, but it runs incredible with everything else going on. So yeah, Rasp's fairly light. This computer, if you could find this one for about $1,000, which is probably a good price, highly recommend. Doesn't have a Retina screen or anything, but you know, it's a powerful computer. Some delay throwage. Okay, let's move on from drums. I did some fun things with bass. I don't normally split bass, but I wanted to build this sort of bass tone throughout the record. So when I built this tone, I designed it where I could have a bass distortion track drop in and out when I wanted to change the bass tone. So instead of actually choosing a different bass tone per song, I would do it like this. So let's take a quick listen. I'll play a spot where it drops out and also comes back in with the distortion. So that was, you know, it helps to lift the parts. It helps to glue the guitars. And this was a very like woofy record on purpose. So I wanted to focus on that. It's just in there adding a little bit of hair, but it's really important when it comes in, especially with the guitars. How do you keep your perspective on a song from a mix after you spend so many hours producing, engineering, and editing it? Oh my God, I actually don't know. I think about this often. I think what happens is it all comes down to the project that you're working on. So for me, I loved the sound of this. A lot of these chord tones came together while tracking, and I track drums last. So, you know, throughout the entire process of the record, I've been hearing these guitar tones. I've been hearing these bass tones. I, you know, worked on the vocal, especially with CLA vocals happening. And, you know, a lot of these tones by design happened in production. That when it came to mixing a record like this in particular, the change between production and mix wasn't huge. It was very much a linear process that led me to just a better sound, especially with Seb drumming. Like, you can go on my Instagram, if you look through drum sounds, there's a video of when we were tracking drums, and I was just losing my brain over how good they sounded on the way in. So the record like this came together very easy for me to mix, but I will lose perspective on a record very easily, especially if it's a long record, especially if I'm here for, you know, 5 weeks working on a record. What I tend to find is I hire outside editors these days. I do drums last, and I leave all my editing, all my vocal editing for last. So what happens is I will ship off drums and vocals to my editor, and that takes about a week. And in that week, I will vow to not do anything else to that record. I'll take the first day to prep the rest of it, make sure all the guitars are cleaned up, make sure everything, although I tend to do a lot of that during production, but I will take that week off from the record. So I will usually, when I finish tracking a record, take a week off before I mix it. And that week adds tons of perspective to me in terms of being able to just clear my mind out of it and then go back ready to go. Doesn't always make it easier. Like I said in other videos, I tend to mix songs 2 or 3 times before I decide on the final mix. But it definitely helps to just clear my mind in that moment. Nice to see what looks like the TSE bass. Oh, dude, the TSE BOD, if you go to any video I've done so far, is my daily driver. It is the best sounding SansAmp plugin I've ever heard in my life. And it's free. I can't believe it's free. I'd have paid easily $50 to $80 for this thing. I've never struggled with a P bass or a jazz bass to get the exact bass tone I've wanted by using just that single plugin. So yeah, bass is sort of a light guy. I've got 11 Mark II as the distortion bass track. This is solely probably because I was using 11 a lot. I would pick any amp sim, and if you look at what I'm doing here, I'm taking off a bunch of the gross fizziness and a bunch of the low end. The amp sim's not as important to me for this distortion tone. This distortion tone is just here to add a bit of hair. So any amp sim would do the trick. Yes, I do tune bass with Melodyne. Let's see if I did with this one. Nope, I didn't do it on this record, but yes, many times I've tuned bass with Melodyne. I find Melodyne 4 works the best for it. Melodyne 3 is ridiculous and sometimes does this weird movie thing. But yeah, Melodyne 4 for bass is a fantastic thing. Oh, thank you, Troy. I appreciate that. I see you don't use much high-pass filtering on tracks. I tend to cut for almost everything that's not kick or bass. Otherwise, I tend to freak out. I actually do too. This record's a bit of an anomaly on records I work on. I work on fairly like overproduced, stylized sounds, and I like that. Like I like making a record that sounds slick and modern and huge. The goal for this record for me wasn't the slick modernness of a, very flashy pop punk record. It was the modern sound of a sort of classic approach. So I found I didn't have to do a crazy amount of rolling off. Like I definitely do have rolling off happening on almost every track, but it's not as hard as I would dive into rolling off on a lot of other stuff. And that's just because I didn't need the cleanliness of that like super slick, everything's gone from the overheads vibe. Like if you listen to these overheads, you're hearing so much drum kit in them. That filter there, is a cleanup job more than it is a deliberate move to get rid of, say, kick drum out of that mic, which I will do on some records, but on this one I didn't feel the need to. So most of the time I am doing what you're saying, where I'm high passing a ton on everything, but this just didn't seem like the direction I needed to go for the mix on this record. Alrighty, guitars. The entire guitar process on this record was STL tonality and CLA guitars, hilariously enough. So when I got the demos from Jon, we were looking at the sessions and he was rocking CLA guitars, and I was like, what are you doing? I want to talk about that before I even get to the rhythms. I was like, what are you doing? He's like, dude, it sounded good and it was the only thing I had. And the settings made their way to the final record. I've never in my life used this plugin on a guitar track. And when I saw his sessions and saw that it was there and realized it sounded exactly how I wanted the octaves to sound, I used it. I used it on a ton of the guitars on this record. It added the perfect type of tone for an octave guitar. And since then, I've used this setting on so many mono octaves. Just checking. Yeah, so that was a Tele. So it worked so well with a single coil guitar. It did a great job of soaring above the tone of the rhythms. How do you approach miking drums, especially overheads? Overheads, I'll do space pair measured to the snare drum. I point them directly down. I try to put them onto the edge of the cymbals instead of over the middle of the cymbals at any point. And I don't particularly care about the relationship with the kick drum. If it's super wonky, I will go in and I'll take care of it. But for the most part, I find that the kick drum tends to work itself out as long as the snare is well balanced in the overheads. Oh, we are not hearing those because those are muted. So an even overhead, making sure that cymbals aren't overpowering, especially like Seb was such a hard hitter, but thankfully he hit the drums harder than he hit the cymbals, and it made a very well-balanced picture in the overheads. Ooh, I'm going to talk about the acoustics in a sec. I'm really excited about the acoustics in this song because we ended up putting them through the entire song and adding a couple little tasty treats. So I will get to the acoustics in a sec. I just want to wrap up the rhythms here. Actually, I'll sort of get to the acoustics now. One of my favorite things to do in a production these days is doubling a an overdrive guitar with a mono acoustic. I did it in the Romancer song, and I also did it in this song, and it's one of my favorite moves. It adds such a cool sound. And considering this with the pad that's happening, which this lead pad was from the demo, it sets such a perfect vibe. This song opens the record, so to me it was important when you hit play on this record that every element you heard was a very beautiful sound.
I just wanna feel alive for the first time in my life. I wanna see you in the limelight, girl. I want you with me all the time.
Honestly, STL Tone Hub is one of my favorite plugins these days, the new one, but STL Tonality does some incredible stuff still, and I still use it regularly. This is one of my favorite overdrive tones I've ever got, whether I've mic'd an amp or used an amp sim, and it's just Howard Benson.
Like girl, I want you with me all the time. 'Cause if we get sober, we'll never get old until we die. And I should have told.
Yeah, the miking electric guitar strings is really cool too. I've done that a couple times on records. In fact, a record that I'm really stoked on that I recently recorded has a song with that vibe, and when I mixed it, it's sometimes a little bit of a struggle to mix instead of the acoustic thing, but it's a really cool production tip. Pat was straight afterthought when I was demoing, and I can't believe it's in there. Dude, it made the song, man. If the song just started, like... hang on, I gotta bring your vocal back for this demonstration.
I just wanna feel alive.
Like, that's cool, John. You're a good singer and whatnot, but like that pad, oh boy. Yeah, John, how was that pad made? Is that a synth or is that a guitar? I just have some cleanup going on that pad and a plate verb to really extend the width of the pad.
I feel alive for the first time in my life.
So we drop into this verse here. We've got, left and right, STL doing the big noise here. I loved that. I think it's a layer of a few stock synths in Logic. Nice. My goal with this record was these big sort of, Troy, was this big sort of heavy guitar sound, like almost Weezer-y, but that doesn't always work in plugins, so it takes a little bit of work to make that happen. And carrying the fifth over, actually call it the Weezer chord, is a big production move that really helps make that guitar tone big. Also, gain is less important on those types of tones. In fact, I would wager to say that gain on bass is more important than the gain on guitar in a sound like this. And on that, I'm doing, this guy, I'll tell you right now, cab 2 is the only cab you'll ever really want to use in this program if you get it. But all these amps are so good with that cab, you can get a variety of great tones. What did I do to this? I cleaned it up a little bit, just got rid of like annoying frequencies, as always with cleanup. I try not to make EQ do extra. I try to just make it clean up. And then I was pinning the guitars down a bit, which is something I do these days I used to not do. I quadded the guitars on this record, which I also never do, but it's because it's this type of record that I wanted very wide guitars on the chorus dropped. So I used humbucker guitar, chances are my LTD with the hollow body LTD. Actually, it's labeled LTDL. And I added in my Telecaster as well. It's amazing when you have Evertune guitars because quadding up guitars is so easy. So the tellies are playing chorded versions, like full chords, whereas the LTD is playing the power chord with the fifth, and it gives a very chimey, pretty sound to everything happening. It's just barely in there, but it adds, you know, so much width, especially when these guitars rock over here. Yeah, I think depending on the key of the song, we'll capo it. I don't know if we capoed this one. I think actually most of these chords could be played without the capo based on the tuning of the song. But yeah, I will. I'll go in and I'll find where all those chords live, and we'll capo them and record them like that. And I'll sometimes do that with the acoustics as well. So I do want to talk about the acoustics. Like I mentioned with the tambourine, the goal of this song was to add this really pretty percussive element in this tempo that was just constantly going. So what we decided to do on this song was basically double the entire song with acoustics. You know, it adds this little bit of chime. I mean, if I could go back and change something, honestly, I probably would have turned up these acoustics. Especially this little riff here, which I totally forgot about until listening to this video the other day, or checking out this session the other day. How did I mic these acoustics? This was probably, let me see what the input is. AML? That's probably a lie. Neve 1? Yeah, there we go. Okay, that's the truth there. This was, I don't remember what acoustic it was. John, was it an acoustic you guys brought? Like a Taylor or something? Honestly, I think all I did was, I don't double mic acoustics or anything like that. These were a single mic, about 12 fret. It was a vintage U87 into a Neve preamp with a little bit of EQ going on into a distressor. That's the one, the Taylor 210. Such a good acoustic. I'm gonna show something off really quickly here that I don't think. Here it is. I'll pull it into here. So one of the added benefits to doing this entire song with an acoustic underneath was, as a little treat to Jon, I made him an acoustic version of the song. And the way I did that was literally just muting out everything but the acoustics, some of the bass, and some of the background production, and made him a bounce that was just, you know, acoustic happening. And we're gonna take a listen to that quick. I'm gonna kill the main feed here for a sec.
Where's that sense of adventure that I had in all my younger years? Mid-October, the stereo screaming, one hand on your lap, one hand on the feeling. But as I get older, the chip on my shoulder's hard to hide. And as I get older, the child within me starts to die. And if you asked me to stay, I'd be leading with this. You're on a very long list of the things that I miss, so won't you hold me like you did that night? Well, maybe I know otherwise. Where's that sense of danger?
I really enjoyed doing that. I thought it was like a very fun way to take something we did and sort of experiment with it. And we made an acoustic version of the song just out of, you know, how we tracked the main song. And it wasn't planned, you know. I don't even think that's released. I think I kind of gave it to him as a little treat. And it all came from just being able to track the entire song. So sometimes you get these little happy accidents when you do stuff like that. But yeah, all the acoustics on this record were the Taylor 210 CE, and yeah, I just mic'd it up, vintage U87. Doesn't need to be vintage U87, could be any condenser. I don't put a lot of stock into those things. I sort of just, when it sounds good, I roll with it. I had a bit of compression on the way in, making sure that the low end wasn't being compressed, because Arouser's a bit of a strange plugin on acoustics. Sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't. And I find that it does a weird thing to low end. And it's really its only sort of downfall. So, I went pretty aggressive right up to 110 hertz. And then, the cleanup job I would typically do on an acoustic. Cleaning up more of that build up. Oh, by the way, these leads are also CLA guitar, the same setting as that other mono guitar, and I just pan them left and right. I edit guitars and bass pretty liberally. On a record like this, I would go a little softer on it. Chances are I edited this bass pretty close to the grid, but I also just sort of listen through, like if you see these hits are a little more loose, but it's just something that I'll do with, like, I edit guitars and bass as I go. So what you're seeing is basically the decisions I made in the moment. I'll usually make sure stops and starts are really accurate and things like that, but like, little bits like that, I'm not totally concerned if it doesn't sound ridiculous. This project, I barely edited the timing of the electrics, but Jon is a really consistent player. Andy, the guitarist, the other guitarist in the band, was also really consistent. And it's easy with this sort of flowy tempo to like let noises come through and, in this type of genre, let these sort of things happen. I wasn't worried about actually cleaning that up and everything. How do you approach EQing guitars? Okay. EQing guitars is one of the toughest things in my opinion. You can EQ a guitar till you're blue in the face trying to get rid of every resonance, and then you realize you've gotten rid of the soul of the guitar. So let's go to the chorus, because the chords are a little clearer there. You start with a good tone. I trust STL. I dialed this in. I probably started from Helena Rhythm, which was just a preset I like the sound of, and then tweaked it, to my liking a little bit more. That's the beginning thing. You want to enjoy the guitar tone you're hearing. And it's also really easy to fall victim to hearing a guitar tone so much that you hate the sound of it and you want another one. When that happens, when you're like, hey, what is the deal? I liked this guitar tone when I first heard it. Leave it alone. Leave it for 10 minutes. Go grab a coffee, come back, listen to the guitar again. You'll thank yourself, especially if you're working on NS10s. All right, first things I do, I'll always take off the top end. You could probably barely hear that depending on what you're listening on. And because you can barely hear it, why not get rid of it? It's not like we need it. This extra low-end rumble, somebody was talking about high-pass filtering earlier. This is something I will always do. This is a little lower than I normally go because I wanted these guitars to be a little bigger. But that low-end buildup nobody needs. Then what I'll do is just sort of go through and listen. Almost every cab has a terrible resonance around 2300. Nobody got time for that. So we get rid of that. Just a little. You almost don't even notice it happen until it goes. Then I usually go through and look for the most annoying ones. Like the ones I absolutely cannot stand hearing, which happen to be this one on here. I didn't want that. I just didn't want that like grossness. And then a little bit of 45. those little ones tend to be last minute moves, and I can tell because they're so little that it's just like, okay, you know what? This little bit is bothering me. I'm just going to knock it out. If I'm losing something from doing all that, I will go in and add just a bit of 8K to the top. Doesn't really matter what plugin I do 8K with. I was big on VMR at the time of this record, so I was, what'd I do? I was adding 8K with this. And that almost makes up for the other moves taking away a bit of top end, but adding a pleasant version of top end back. And then the FG Stress or any sort of plugin afterwards, I don't always do it. You know, guitars are fairly compressed by nature. Sometimes if I want it just a little louder, I'll toss a compressor on instead of turn up the fader. I don't know why I do that. Or if I find that, you know, palms are a little unruly, I will go in with the compressor, and really the compressor is only triggering on sort of the absolute loudest points. Those ideas and principles go across the whole thing. You know, again, 22, 23 on this one, another annoying sound at 32 on these Tele guitars, bit of top end added to it. Different tone in the Howard Benson. Yeah, red amp, which is such a good amp. Yeah, that's really it. It comes down so much to your source tone, and you want to be able to work with that at the end of the day. Yes, I am incredibly particular when it comes to tracking bass and guitar in terms of picks, strings, and guitars. I will compress a DI a little bit on the way in. However, my guitars have a very loud output, and they sort of self-compress on their way in. So this is my LTD. I own the LTD Ben Weinman. It's a guitar that comes stock with an Evertune bridge, and I wanted a hollow body guitar as well. So I got, you know, two birds stoned at once by getting that one. And I tossed in Classic 57, which are my favorite Gibson pickups, a very like mild sound that's really nice. Okay, fresh strings are incredibly important. I will not track a guitar without fresh strings, especially rhythm guitar. Fresh strings, I generally use Ernie balls, but I'm not attached to Ernie balls. As long as they're fresh, as long as they're great, and as long as they're the right gauge for the guitar, that's all that matters. Evertune is really important to me because a lot of guys play sort of hard, and then their guitars go out of tune, and it sounds like crap, and I can't deal with it. And it kills creativity to constantly be tuning, in my opinion. So I rely on those Evertunes to really just keep the flow of excitement going through a record. And then picks. Picks aren't as important. However, the Tortex, the orange or yellow guys are my favorite. They add a lot of a percussive vibe to the guitar. And the Evertunes allow you to play really hard. So I've sort of leaned on letting guys really beat the piss out of a guitar because the Evertune is more forgiving than a regular guitar. And it adds this sound to my productions that I find a lot of other people don't have. I think it's an important part of my sound in terms of guitar, because I don't really think about guitar tones. I don't really think about these things. I just kind of, sounds good, feels good, cool. Why, any guitar tone can sound good. So much of it comes from the person's hand at the end of the day. And, that's no exception. So it's really important that's part of my production, is to really, make sure I'm getting the best out of the artist's abilities at the end of the day. I did try Neural DSP. I own the Nolly, where is it? Archetype Nolly. I love this plugin. As long as it doesn't cause a problem here. Ooh. Oh, you're so big. I think this is one of the best amp sims I've heard in a long time, the Archetype. There's a preset here I like. Where is it? I might have saved it up here. Dark and Dope is open. Oh, I'm on the wrong amp. Give me a sec. Ooh. Out of the box, that is a fantastic sounding amp sim. All I did there, I tweaked this setting the first time I made it. It actually plays really well with that STL tone. And, you know, I would go in and do some cleanup to that for sure. Let's take a quick listen. All right, Nolly tends to freak out my computer a little bit, so hopefully while I play back, we don't get a crash, but let's see what happens. Oh, there it is. All of these cabs are so good. I cannot believe how good this plugin is. I think Nolly is probably one of the best sounding out of the box amp sims you can buy. It works on everything. It's got so many options. It's got so many cabs. Strongly recommend it. Honestly, it pairs well with STL. I use it a lot on leads, and it's really easy to dial in a rhythm because it's got like an 800 head in there, and I love 800s. I didn't own Nolly at the time of doing this record. I might have used it if I did. But yeah, I think that they're on par, to be honest. But there is a realness to the Nolly that you don't get out of the STL sometimes. Although STL Tone Hub, you get a lot of realness out of. I just didn't own that either at the time. It didn't exist. All right, I'm going to move on from guitars. I don't mind answering a few more questions about them if you guys have them. But I do want to talk about vocals because I love the vocals on this song. They're not a lot going on, but what is going on is super important. So, vocals. We tracked these at a couple different places, but overall, I was very happy with the sound of them. Sometimes, you know, you get this. You don't always get the most ideal situations in records, and I was doing the vocals on this record at 2 different studios, which bummed me out during mixing. Although I think on this song we did it all at my studio, which made me very happy. Chances are vocals on this were U87 again, into a Neve pre, into Blue 1176, you know, typical Sam crap going on. Very little post-processing, don't think it needs it, you know.
I just wanna feel alive for the first time in my life.
Let's go to some exciting big parts in this jam.
Where's that sense of adventure that I had in all my younger years? Mid-October, the stereo screaming, one hand on your lap, one hand on the feeling. But as I get older, the chip on my shoulder's hard to hide.
I can actually answer that right now because I'm going through my compressor. I usually go through a blue stripe for vocals if it's a condenser mic, and I'm taking anything from 10 to 20 dB off of the top notes. I don't mind the sound. I think it's really important that I drive home what I want out of the compressor on the way in because I tend to tailor my sounds the way I like. We'll take a listen to that, actually. I'm going to kill all the extra verb and stuff.
My whole life, where's that sense of adventure that I had in all my younger years? Mid-October, the stereo screaming, one hand on your lap, one hand on the feeling.
So, Andy, what's up? So you can hear Andy's the guitarist in this band. He played on this record. He did the bass on most of it and a lot of the lead guitars. So you can see that is a fairly finished vocal sound. It, in my opinion, only needed a little bit more. So I went in, I did my cleanup. I wanted it a little bit brighter.
Where's that sense of adventure?
I tend to use Pro Q3 as a de-esser at the same time. So you see this is a dynamic thing that's only happening when it needs to.
Where that I had in all my younger years. Mid-October, the stereo screaming.
And this is almost always my go-to vocal compression if I'm using this. Vocal compressors for me are either Arouser or CLA76. Won't use anything else on a vocal. You can even see that there's like a inactive CLA76 because when I start with my template for mixing, I've got both of them pulled up, ready to go. And I shoot them out. Usually if I track with an 1176, I won't use CLA76 in the mix. And if I track with a distressor, I'll use CLA76 in the mix. So it's a bit of a toss-up.
Where's that sense of adventure?
I very liberally compress the piss out of things. But Arouser/distressors let you do that with such clarity.
Where's that sense of adventure that I had in all my younger years? Mid-October, the stereo screaming.
And I've got some soft clipping going on here. Actually, it's fairly hot when you see it happen.
Where's that sense of adventure?
This is cool. So this version of Arouser can let you bypass. Try to take a listen to see if you can hear what happens to the vocal when I kill this saturator circuit.
Where's that sense of it?
I'm going to kill this reverb and this extra saturation as well so you can really focus.
Where's that sense of adventure? Where's that sense of adventure?
It's a subtle change, but what happens there is the vocal gets cleaner without that saturation, yet in a mix, the vocal without that extra saturation will sort of sit on top and sound a little karaoke-ish instead of sort of sitting pretty. And I want it to like have its own home. So adding that extra saturation in a big, wet, saturated mess of stuff is really good to kind of glue everybody together.
Where's that sense of adventure that I had in all my younger years? Mid-October.
I tend to do mono harmonies in verses, stereo harmonies in choruses. This song is no exception. Also having doubles happen in the chorus. You'll see these tracks called double 1, double 2, but in the verses, they actually are home to the harmonies.
Mid-October, the stereo screaming, one hand on your lap, one hand on the feeling. But as I get older, the chip on my shoulder.
You ever focus on the placement of where you put the mic on the vocalist? Absolutely. It's super important to focus on that. Some mics are a little more forgiving. Funny enough, you think an SM7 isn't forgiving because of you have to be right in its face. But if you go overboard and hold an SM7 right in the face, like I have an SM7 right now and I'm nice and close to it all of a sudden, it'll capture your voice pretty evenly as long as you don't swing left and right. U87, also fairly forgiving, but I tend to find with an 87, if a capsule's a little too high to the lips, let's say, like a little above, you get this kind of darkness that's not nice sounding. So what I'll tend to do is I'll tend to play with exactly where to place the capsule, and then I'll tend to put the pop filter at least about 8 to 12 inches away, and I'll change that depending on proximity effect. If I'm finding a vocalist is really woofy and boomy, I will set the pop filter a little further back and tell them, like, this is your limit. You can get right in the pop filter's face, but do not, move the pop filter. That's kind of like our end game there. But I will experiment with that. If I'm finding that the mic dead on isn't doing what I want, maybe I'll drop it a little bit slightly, or if I find a singer tends to lean forward while they sing, I'll cater the mic towards them to get the cleanest sound on the way in, basically. Yeah, like I said, all the vocals on this were U87. I've got a vintage one I'm a very large fan of. Yeah, let's talk a bit more about these vocals. I opted to just use CLA vocal on this, and one fun thing I did was automating the plugin throughout the record. So when I wanted a different reverb, when I wanted a different type of slap going on or longer delay, like I've got my vocal delay that happens in choruses separate, but all of the other moves, whether I'm dropping in new reverbs or changing the amount of something, as we can see here, I think those are the three. How can I also extend the reverb? There we go. Cool. These are all the moves I'm doing, and I'm doing them as I need to. And, it's this sort of automation moves on a song like this that keep it very interesting and moving. Start a better spot.
I feel like I've known you my whole life. Where's that sense of adventure?
I'm going to keep the plugin open while this happens. It's very interesting to see how this all changed. So, you've got this tight little verb starting at the beginning. Actually, no, you don't. You've just got the large verb lower.
And I should have told you, I feel like I've known you my whole Where's that sense of adventure that I had in all my...
I don't know if you noticed that, but the reverb type literally changes for the one line in the song to tight instead of large.
Where's that sense of adventure?
The reason for that is the tail on the large verb is really long, and this is a spot in the song where all of a sudden everybody needs to listen to the vocal. You know, we come out of this big spacey intro. This is the first vocal before it comes in, so we dry it up a little bit and then get big.
On you my whole life. Where's that sense of adventure that I had in all my younger years? Mid-October.
And if you notice throughout this song, I'll show you in different spots, I do this trick often, and it is really to build a vocal dynamic throughout the mix.
And if you asked me to stay, I'd be leading with this. You're on a very long list of the things that I miss, so won't you?
Changing these types of things really sets apart just like a static mix to something very exciting, especially when a song is very focused on the songwriting more than the production aspect. These little moves add so much. Like, listen, every time I hear this, I'm so excited, and I think I don't even know how to talk about it without sounding like a nerd. I just love that you can hear the change, and it changes your the characteristic of the whole song in that moment.
And if you asked me to stay, I'd be leading with this. You're on a very long list of the things that I miss, so won't you hold me like you did that night? Well, maybe I know otherwise. Where's that sense of danger?
Those moves just separate, you know, something just kind of boring to something very, like, very in your head that keeps it there, you know? What are you looking for when picking a vocal verb? I'm looking for a couple things. Honestly, I have a lot of trouble picking vocal reverbs. It's the reason I go to CLA Vocals is because, honestly, the tight is the small reverb I want, and the large is the big reverb I want. I can go through different plugins. Like, I use Valhalla Vintage Verb a lot on vocal. What I'm looking for on a tight reverb is a bit of a plate vibe tucked in the background that you only hear when you need to hear it. And what I'm looking for in a large reverb is a lush sound with a large pre-delay that pushes the vocal forward, but with the pre-delay has this lush background tucked away. Those are really important aspects to me. Also, when I'm picking a vocal verb, slap delay comes into it a lot, because there's times where I'll just use slap delay instead of a reverb to give that fast room sound that almost sounds like you're just there in the moment, you know? I still struggle with reverbs to this day, but I never look back on a recording I've done and gone, I hate the reverb. So I guess I'm doing sort of something right there. Are you big on templates before you mix? So my template is a little different than most people's templates. Some guys have a ton of stuff ready. When I import a template, all I have are these 5 buses and these 2 print tracks set up, as well as this master with an L1 on it. These have no plugins on them except for VMR across with console set to nothing, and then I'll play with that. And then sometimes they'll have, like, this template, I changed it since, but this template had FG Gray and FG Red going, and I would bypass in between the two. But no, my template is mostly routing more than anything else. Sometimes it'll have the vocal delay in it as well. But, so yeah, I will start with a template, but really what I do is I have my top 2 plugins set here, FabFilter and Arouser, and that's on every channel. And then you go over here to EQ. Oh, this session might not actually have it. I think I had a crash recently that wiped it. But FabFilter, Arouser, CLA, and SSL. So my templates are actually more of ready-to-go plugins when I need them than actual decisions being made in the template. I don't always set up my verbs or delays. However, I do have them constantly saved in their plugins because I do like to sort of play around with those. So yeah, my template is more routing based than it is, you know, oh, I've got SSL on every channel, or I've got whatever on every channel. Yeah, Andy, honestly, the point is to not notice those things. It's supposed to just be like, I know something's different, but I can't put my finger on it. And that's kind of like the magic of mixing, in my opinion.
And if you asked me to stay, I'd be leading with this. You're on a very long...
It's so cool. I love it. All right, I want to talk about some fun things. I don't think I've done any mixes yet with the verb swell. I've done some with the delay swell, but one of my favorite things to do, and I do it with Little Plate a lot, although these days I do it with Valhalla Shimmer because it's like a ridiculous plugin, is this little movement that happens behind certain words.
Hold until we die. And I should have told ya, I feel like I've known you my whole life. Where's that sense of adventure?
We'll get to the throw in a sec. So if you look at this verb swell bus, it automates off and on from the main vocal when it needs to. So only certain words go to it. And when you send certain words to it, you now get this sort of lush vibe going on.
Me starts to die. And if you asked me to stay...
Yeah, it fills the space and pauses. If you listen musically when these parts happen.
Me starts to die. And if you asked me, we die. And I should have told ya, I feel like I've known you my whole life.
So Jon Fraser, everybody in the chat, Jonathan Fraser is he is basically, the brainchild behind Northbound, the singer, guitarist, songwriter of the band. When I got the demos, there were so many delay throws. He was like, we did a podcast recently. He talked about how hilarious it was that we had so many. And I love delay throws. I love effects, but some were just belligerent and ridiculous. And I right away, I was like, no, we're losing those. So, we still have our share of delay throws across the record, but they now happen when they need to. And you can see I made like some decisions like, maybe this one would be cool, and ended up muting it in the final mix and things like that. But it was hilarious. There's a song on the record, I think it was Honey, that had so many delay throws that were just like stepping on things. And I think I literally laughed at John when he showed me it. I was like, we are not doing those. He's like, why? I was like, listen to this. Anyways, let's talk delay throw. Actually, before we talk delay throw, is it static that you're sending? Yes. So I don't write the automation on the send here. I just do the mute, and then I'll write the automation to that actually here. So if you see, the swell track stays quiet the whole time except for when it actually has to do it. Yeah, John, that's how the first time I learned how to do automation like this, which I'm talking about here, I would do everything with it. Like I would do delay throws like this until I realized it was easier just to do that. I thought it was more professional though to be like, look, you can do this. You got to do it all the time. What do you mean chop up a chunk of vocal and put a delay on it? That's so amateur, but it's funny what you sort of learn over time. That's like, this is fine. Just do the thing that works at the end of the day. But yeah, delay throws are one of those things like, I nailed the delay throw. I'm going to put it on everything. And this, I'm definitely a victim of that from time to time.
Where's that sense of adventure that I had in all my younger years?
Typical H delay, you hear when it stops, it's still going on, but that tail doesn't really matter because it gets eaten up by the rest of the song. Lo-fi, normally I'll roll these off if there's a lot of S's in the words, but there seem to not be. And then a bit of reverb. So what I did first, actually, before I talk about this, I just straight up duplicate the main vocal. So the EQ setting and the compression settings are identical to the main track. If I kill these two things,
Venture!
You're literally getting exactly the same thing. And what I did there afterwards was, find the delay throw I want, which takes me forever to do.
Venture!
And it was too in my face on playback, so I added a little bit of a reverb to that. That's an important thing. A lot of guys will just toss a delay throw and be like, this is great, and then it like pops out and is like so annoying. This is going to the reverbs of the rest of the song. This is doing everything else, but let's also add a bit more verb to just tuck it back into the where it's got to be.
Sense of adventure!
Yeah, right there is way too much delay, and I could have maybe turned that down, but chances are I tried to turn it down and didn't get the right vibe, so I went in and reached for a delay. Reverb. I'm an idiot.
Where's that sense of adventure that I had in all my younger years?
And it solved all the problems I needed.
Hide. And as I get older, sense of danger that I found every night. Well, that was the moment that I knew what love was, then watched it die. And if you asked me to stay, I'd be leading with this. You're on a very long list.
All right, let's talk about some fun stuff. So, a lot of choruses I do, these sort of one-note harmonies, which I know you've heard in other things. This song is no exception to my production styles.
Very long list of the things that I miss, so won't you hold me like you did that night? Well, maybe.
Love that little one note that just changes at the end. Rest of the choruses, this song only has, it has 3 choruses, but the first one's very short. And I wanted every chorus to lift in different ways. So really, hitting hard with harmonies off the bat is such a fun way sometimes. I don't always do it, but when I do, I'm always very happy with the end result.
Leading with this, you're on a very long list of the things that I miss, so won't you hold me like you did that night? And if you wanna play along, I'll go in for the kiss. You've got a love like a bullet and I'm taking the hit. A voice says, this won't last more than tonight. Well, maybe I know otherwise. Maybe I know otherwise.
Oh, this is my favorite part of the song. Okay, I'm going to talk about this bridge before we talk about the choruses. I kick in an extra delay that is cranked in the bridge. And it really brings this slow vibe of the do 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 got do do, like these drums are slow with this delay like kind of on top of it. It adds this movement in this bridge that I friggin' love so much.
Maybe I know otherwise. I'm begging you to stay the night, 'cause I can be the sooner tide. So over and over again, this is the.
And it's something that we could have gone without. Straight up, this bridge does not need this move. Take a listen to we'll take a listen to the vocal on its own.
Maybe I know otherwise. I'm begging you to stay the night, 'cause I can be the sooner type. So over and over again, this is.
It doesn't need that. I don't think the song would have suffered without it. Take a listen.
Maybe I know otherwise. I'm begging you to stay the night, 'cause I can be the sooner type.
Versus.
Maybe I know otherwise. I'm begging you to stay the night.
But those are the moves. Those are the moves that I like make these videos for. Like I want people to see these kinds of things because those are the things in a mix that no one knows what it is when they hear it. Somebody who doesn't record bands or record music or even play music doesn't know what happened there. All they know is all of a sudden they're enveloped in the part way more than they were a second ago. Would they have been less enveloped without it? We don't know. But the truth is, it's that kind of stuff that really makes things special. And you've got to, you've got to like lean into that sometimes, It's like Jon was saying in the chat, like once I learned how to do delay throws, I couldn't stop doing them. It's like, well, when you're done with delay throws, what are the other ways to make songs interesting? Like maybe I could have just put delay throws like on the end of those long words that went back and forth, but I didn't want that. I wanted this rhythmic prettiness that just happens through this part.
Maybe I know otherwise. I'm begging you to stay the night, 'cause I can be the sooner type. So over and over again.
Also, I love, considering the way I record, I always make sure vocals are done before recording starts. If you listen to that over and over again line, the bass plays along with it. And that's the important thing. That's the importance of pre-production right there.
I can be the sooner type. So over and over again.
I love that.
man. This
Stuff is the best when it happens. I do my typical thing to lift choruses. We're gonna go to the last chorus of this song because it's got the most going on. High thirds going on.
you asked me to stay, I'd be leading with this. You're on a very long list of the things that I miss. So won't you hold me like you did that night?
This song has one of my favorite ad-libs because it does this amazing harmony with the main. I'm going to kill the backing harmonies because this alone is just one of my favorite things.
Asked me to stay, I'd be leading with this. You're on a very long list of the things that I miss. So won't you hold me like you did that night? Just a little closer. And if you want to play,
I absolutely love that so much. I go out of my way to make sure that like ad-libs do stuff like that. My approach to writing harmonies, I sing them out in a feel sort of way. I don't like actually sort of write them per se. Thirds are super easy to grasp. Jon and I were talking about this the other day on his podcast. Jon was a big fan of thirds, and I'm a big fan of thirds. And to me, a third is like layering a guitar. Like it's an extra voicing you can add to lift a part, but I don't want to rely on that as the harmony. So when I'm writing harmonies, I will go for sometimes less typical ones, like that one that's kind of happening on top of the ad lib, or this one that's happening here underneath. We're gonna take a listen. I'm gonna kill these ahs to show this off here.
hold me like you did that night. Hold me like you did that night. Hold me like you did that night.
Just this one note.
Love like a bullet and I'm taking the hit.
So my goal with harmonies is I'll listen, we'll add them sort of like sparse and just where they've got to go. And then we'll find fun spots to lift other ways or to write a different harmony that might sound kind of cool. Like, you listen to this one on its own, it sounds kind of like ham-fisted.
Hold me like you did that night. This is the soundtrack of all my pain.
But, when you add in that third, you get this sort of lush built thing up, especially when this ad-lib happens.
Hold me like you did that night. Just a little closer. And if you want to...
It's one of my favorite things in production I've ever done. So yeah, I don't know. It's a feel approach. I don't want to overdo harmonies. There's times where I would go nuts with them because it was sort of back to the delay throw thing. Oh, I know how to do sick harmonies now. Let me put them everywhere. When really, it's important to put them in the spots where they'll benefit the song the most. And the Romancer video is a really good one that touches on that because Adam's such a strong vocalist. Jon is the exact same way. Super strong vocalist. This character in his voice that I'm only putting a harmony in where it'll benefit the song and not where it'll benefit the voice, because his voice doesn't need any benefit. He writes songs that anybody should be able to pick up the guitar and play beautifully, and that's the charm of Northbound. That's the charm of this band. And I don't want to destroy that charm. I just want to accentuate parts of it when they need to be. I want to talk about these ahs a little bit. I'm doing some fun stuff here, and then we'll go back to the vocals a little bit more. I tend to hit ahs a little harder, so I've got the 76 on it instead of the Pro Q. It also adds a little bit of a better harmonic content to it. These are scooped a little more low end off the bottom, just so they like sort of poke out. And Sidewinder, I think this is the first time I used it. It was a very cool plugin. It's basically like a width and tone control. Excuse me, that like it does a better job than a doubler. It's hard to describe. It's so subtle, but it added way more than like grabbing Waves doubler or like little what's it called? The little guy. Oh my god, I can't spell. Little micro shift. Like I found that this was doing a better job than any of those.
Me like you did that night.
Have I ever changed mics for oohs and ahs? I have. So if I do a record with an SM7 where the vocalist is really aggressive, we want the SM7 for the tone of that microphone. I find that U87 isn't a suit for the vocalist. If that record still has oohs and ahs, then I will switch to a condenser for the oohs and ahs, just because it's softer, it's prettier sounding, and it's when you hit an SM7 with a lot of compression, you get its character right away. And I want the ahs to not be as important in terms of their initial monotone, not monotone, that's the actual word, but like, a mono vocal down the middle has all the character. The stuff on the sides is there to be supportive and doesn't need to be as charactery and exciting. So I'll go for like a condenser, like a cleaner mic on ahs almost all the time, regardless of what I track the main vocals with. And then on the ends of these, I've got these little hooks, into the chorus. I didn't want the big Maybe I Know Otherwise, so we went for like a lo-fi one, and I'll show you how I did that in a sec.
Maybe I know
that was just something simple. That was, you could see I tried some other plugins, copied that sort of clean, setting there, where I took off a bit more low end and boosted the top. And then Gain Reduction. This Gain Reduction Deluxe is like the best plugin ever. I own the new one, the Gain Reduction 2. It's not nearly as good as the other one.
Well, maybe I know otherwise.
It's such a good plugin to slam, add saturation, do all that extra tasty stuff that you kind of want out of a vocal. I'll say this because I don't know if John's still in the chat. His podcast is called Caffeine and Nicotine in Quarantine, and it's live on Instagram. It's not actually it's not like a podcast. We did like a live video together on Instagram for an hour, and then he uploads them to YouTube afterwards to watch. So it's just like a conversation more than it is a podcast between him and I. And I really enjoyed talking to him about it because John I consider to be a very good friend of mine. It's not just a client relationship. So talking to Jon about anything is always a fun time because I don't feel like I'm catering to anything when I talk to Jon. So talk about these lo-fi ones at the end quick.
This won't last more than tonight. Well, something tells me otherwise.
Ooh, I want to talk about that right there. That's really fun. I bring that big eighth note delay up for that very last line, as well as a swell, as well as bringing up the vocal delay, and then everybody bails for the last line. And these are those moves that really sell the end of this song, in my opinion.
This won't last more than tonight. Well, something tells me otherwise.
And even little moves like that something tells me otherwise, the reverb volume goes down. So we're getting just...
Something tells me otherwise.
I changed to the, actually, sorry, not the volume. It goes to tight just for that, and then back to on the end of the Ys, when everything hits hard, we get a large verb to sort of carry out the ending.
Well, something tells me otherwise.
Drums and bass. I might be wrong about the... we didn't do the bass after the vocals. We just had the vocals ready in pre-production. But anyways, what we do is, the way I produce a record is we will go into production, we will talk about the song, we will look at the demo. I won't produce records without demos. So we'll either be making the demo or we'll be talking about the, demo stems that the band has made. We make all our structural decisions, whether we chop down verses, whether we write new parts or whatever. We do all of that in the pre-pro session. Program drums. I'll program the drums if they don't exist, or we'll use the programmed ones that are done. Make all the changes to those, whether they're tempo, kick pattern, blah, 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 all that. And we start tracking the record around the programmed drums. So I'll track guitars first usually, then bass guitar, then lead guitars and vocals will go sort of back and forth. I'll split the days up so the vocalist has a bit of a break. And then absolutely last but not least is drums. I do drums last for a ton of reasons. We can change so many things depending on how the vocals are catering to the song throughout the actual production process. And if you track drums first, then you're stuck with the decisions you made at the beginning of a record. Whereas tracking drums last allows you the freedom to basically go through the entire process from beginning to end without any sort of hiccups. I want to change this drum fill now that we have a sick vocal line that's different, or I want to do this. And, you're not chopping up the tracks to do that. So I'll track drums dead last. especially with drummers like Seb who took directions so well. On every record I do, I hone in on the kick drums. I hone in on where every hit happens. And some of those change throughout the development of a record. And I don't want to sort of like stunt those decisions' growth by doing drums first. So, tracking it all simply to fake drums is great. And then we go in, track the real drums last minute. We get the ability to change fills on the fly. Seb was so unreal with fills that it was just like, I would, this part would lead such a, this would be such a great fill into this part. Can we think of something sick? And then, he'll just come up with it. Like that fill right there. So exits out that bridge so well. Or like out of this chorus into the pause. Every chorus has this sort of middle ground pause. And an important thing in the production of the song was, change that up. So the first chorus starts with a pause, nothing's happening. And the second chorus starts with a pause, plays through in the second half. And if you want to play along, I'll go in. And the third chorus, I wanted to build dynamic. So we have this pause happening here. And a good way to enter into that pause was a super gnarly drum fill. All those fills might not have been so tasty or might not have been in existence if we just tracked first, because I didn't have context of how exciting a vocal is. Just a little close. That huge ad lib happens over this huge fill. They play off each other, and that ad lib was added, dead last in recording almost. I do. I use that approach across the board with everything I produce. These days, I'm taking projects that are very important to me. I don't want to just sort of take work to take work. So when I listen to a song, if I feel that I can do it justice like I did this song or any other song I've sort of shown off that I've produced on this channel, I will take the same approach, because it doesn't benefit me to sort of like, phone in one band or something like that. And it benefits me more to take projects that I don't want to phone in at the end of the day. Because like, I got into this because it was super important to me, and I really wanted to make stuff that sounded awesome. And when I get that opportunity, I think it's really important to lean into that opportunity as if I were a member of the band. And Northbound is absolutely no exception to that. I even joked with Jon a million times, because he went on tour with a couple really cool bands. Like, I'm gonna come and play bass on that tour. I didn't do it, but like that's how important this is to me, and I want that connection with every band. I realized I left a few drum things I don't want to talk about. I love the toms on this record. I know I touched on them, but like, let's take a quick listen. They were just big and thuddy. They were my studio drum kit. And I did so little to them because he played them so well, like I scooped out what I didn't like in them, compressed what I wanted to compress. This is actually called Sam Rack. Like, it's a setting I use all the time, and it works so well when people play the drums so well. One thing I did though is time adjuster. I might have talked about this in other videos. One thing I will do, I'm going back to talk about this because I really think it's an important topic. I will zoom in here, and I will measure the time between the first hit of this and the first hit of when it happens in the overheads. I'll take that number, which usually in the session it shows up here, but this one it doesn't. And I will delay the rack tom into the overhead phase. It's something I started doing recently, and I realized it's because I was struggling to get my toms to like really pop in a mix, especially when I was using real toms. And I was like, what is causing this problem? And what was causing the problem was, phase relationship between the toms and the overheads. I don't do it as much with snares or kicks. I find they're not a huge deal, especially if I'm rolling off a lot on the overheads. But with toms, for some reason, it can make them go from like weirdly hollow to something really big and exciting. And also I realized I was using JST clip on this drum bus here. Don't use this guy a lot, but sometimes, especially with hard-hitting drummers, when they're poking out just a little bit, it's nice to sort of keep them in place with that. Anyways, back to vocals. Jon is an incredible vocalist. He's one of those guys that I felt lucky to record at the end of the day. He was very accepting of my ideas, and he's also very passionate about his music. And those two things together are really important. He let me into this project as if I were a part of the band. And I know it's a big ask for a lot of people to do. And I think it really pays off at the end of the day. So I want to play a little bit of the ending of this song again. This last chorus has the most interesting vocal stuff going on I want you all to hear it. I want you to sort of absorb it. I want you to see how little moves, when you're paying attention to, especially down here at the end of this, all these little things happening on the vocal. This is the stuff that makes a song, in my opinion. And it's so important to go in, even if you take 10 minutes at the end of the song, or, go in the next day after you've mixed the song, see what you can spice up, see what you feel is lacking. Let's take a listen to this last chorus to the end of the song, because to me, it's one of the best parts of the record.
Asked me to stay, yeah. And if you asked me to stay, I'd be leading with this. You're on a very long list of the things that I miss, so won't you hold me like you did that night? And if you wanna play along, I'll go in for the kiss. You've got a love like a bullet, and I'm taking the hit. A voice says this won't last more than tonight. This won't last more than tonight. Well, something tells me otherwise.
Guys, that is Northbound's very long list. I want to hang out for a couple more minutes. If anybody's got any questions, if they want to talk about something specific in the song, by all means, don't hesitate. But yeah, I think that this is, hands down, I was talking to Jon about this. It's one of my favorite, I think it's one of my favorite songs that I was just able to, or records even, the whole record that I was just able to become, involved in and immerse myself in and dedicate myself to. And, I'm no stranger to talking about hardships and records and things like that. None of this record was easy for anybody involved, but it never felt like a challenge against each other. And that was something that I really appreciated Jon for letting me be involved in, is that every time there was a hardship, every time there was an issue, we were able to overcome these things really easily. I really cared about this record from the beginning to end, from the first time I heard any of the demos, and especially when I started working with Jon and he would realize these little ideas I would put in, he really loved them, and I realized that I had this opportunity to work with this band that I, sometimes once in a lifetime, especially because you listen to this kind of song. I'm a big fan of bands like Saves the Day and Say Anything and things like that, and this has that vibe, and these are sort of like once in a lifetime artists, in my opinion. So I was very happy to work with any of that. Do I do any bus automation? All right, let's work backwards on this list, Jon. I was just pumping your tires for a bit there, Schwitty. Yes, so bus automation happens on all my buses. I'll generally group a bus here called instrument, where it groups these three, and I'll have the vocals muted, and I will go through the song and make little increments, especially in a song like this where it's loud all the time. It's super important to build that dynamic throughout the song. So it's a little subtle, but it happens in the right spots. You can see these moves where we go from the quiet to the big. Or out of the bridge, especially, actually, maybe going into the bridge is going into that next chorus. They're very subtle movements, but they add a lot, especially in vocals. And you can see that the vocal probably has more automation, as subtle as it is, than anything else. A little bit happening there to make that boost. The last line boost up, especially because there's no double on the last line, whereas the rest of it has a double. And then little movement changes along the vocal tracks in general, just to kind of give it a vibe. I'm going to close this up. Okay, so let's see what else. Do you have any tips on tuning raspy, gritty vocals? Hire someone else to do it. That's my tip. I hate tuning raspy, gritty vocals. Melodyne mostly hates it, especially if the vocalist is sharp. Melodyne is not stoked. It'll make him sound like a monster. I'll generally tune raspy or gritty vocals with autotune separately, because autotune will track it a little bit easier. But when it shows up in Melodyne, sometimes it shows up an octave lower. What you've got to do is go in and you've got to reset the detection to be in the right key, and then just very carefully go through the song. Like, tuning raspy vocals is the worst. You've just got to take your time with it. There's no shortcut, unfortunately. Yeah, Melodyne definitely hates it at the end of the day. It's one of the worst. Compressor settings on drum bus. Oh, it's okay. I didn't actually talk about it because they're sort of the settings I do on a lot, but I will talk about it. Arouser is my drum bus compressor. It replaced a hardware compressor I used a lot called the JDK R22. I wish somebody would make a plugin of that. It's still the best drum bus compressor hardware anyways. Also, I would sometimes use distressors on drum buses. So when the Arouser came out, it was a no-brainer. This is the settings for that. I'm going to zoom in because I know it might be a little blurry on YouTube. Almost always a medium/fast attack, fairly fast release. This changes a lot. A lot of the times I'm at 1 to 5 or 2. This record, I wanted it to punch a little more. I wanted to get a bit more saturation out of the distressor on the way in. Oh, the drum sound of this record is so good. You could see that, that low end energy triggers the compressor more, even with this cutoff going on. It's just something that you sort of got to play around with, but I want this sort of transparent vibe that works really exciting, lets the snare drum open up when it needs to, which the fast release really helps with. And then, yeah, I'm almost never taking more than 4 or 5 off, and that's usually on the kick more than anything. On top of that, I'll usually have a bit of an EQ before that. Let's see. Yeah, definitely have it going on here. Neaves are broad. They're great to just make nice little strokes across the drums. JST clip, I clip it more. So you see I'm clipping it here a bit with extra saturation. Clipping again to hold it in place, and clipping again with this guy. I'll use a little bit of each to do different things. So I like how the Arouser clips, but it doesn't do enough. So JST clip will come after. And then I use VTM not for its clipping as much as for the actual sound it imparts on the drums at the end of the day. What else we got here? How long does it take you to mix a whole song? On this record, it probably didn't take me long. I probably got a mix I was very happy with within about 2-ish hours, especially after all the prep. I don't count prep in my mixing. I think the most important thing is really focusing on, I count my mixes starting after I do all the prep work. So yeah, about 2 hours, but I've taken anywhere from 4 to 8 hours to get a mix done. I've taken 2 days to get a mix done. The beauty is once that first mix is done, especially on a record that needs to carry a similar sonic sound across the board, I can then take it around and do what I got to do with it. So yeah, anywhere from, I would say safely, it takes me about 4 hours to mix a song. From like the first song on a record anyways. Did you do, bus automation, I already talked about that. How do you compress the kick sample in terms of attack, getting more body and attack? Well, parallel compression is doing the most compression in my mixes, drum-wise anyways. So we'll take a quick listen here. I didn't rely a lot on sample in this record. So this is just, it's like a snare preset. I guess I tweaked a little bit. I'm literally just using it to pin it into place. It's almost doing nothing. It's bringing out the room a little bit, but it's not really doing much. However, the drum comp, that's doing a lot. And that's sort of where I get my beef of, drum sound from at the end of the day. The kick drum itself, I'm doing a pretty hefty amount of compression on. I'm using it to fatten out that low end a little bit and give it that round little like thumpiness. And that's kind of that's kind of what I do. Because like I said, I rely a lot on that parallel compression to get the width I want out of a drum, like the splat. And then I also rely a decent amount on drum bus compression to really accentuate the ideas I want out of those drums. I know you probably covered this, but how much of the acoustic guitar we tracked for this was kept? All of it was kept, but the level of it was low. In fact, like I sort of mentioned it a little bit earlier. Adventure! If I would... Oh my God, John, shut up. If I would go back and change one thing, it would be the level of the acoustics. I thought that this song could definitely use more. And in fact, we tracked this little pretty lead. I don't remember if you played it or if Jon played it. That's basically non-existent in the mix, and I feel like a friggin' dummy because it's so pretty. However, Andy, I don't know if Jon has told you, there is a secret acoustic version of this song. Yeah. Oh, was it you who played that lead? Yeah, and I buried it, you little freak. No, I'm kidding. You're not a freak. You're great. Let's take a listen to this acoustic version because I cranked it in that.
And if you wanna play along, I'll go in for the kiss. You've got a love like a bullet and I'm taking the hit. A voice says, this won't last more than tonight. Well, maybe I know otherwise. Maybe I know otherwise.
God, I love that version of the song and none of you have it. Well, Jon has it. What else we got here? Connor just dropped in, so I might have missed. What was the signal chain for recording vocals? The video or the vocal chain on this record was a U87 into a Neve preamp, a vintage U87, like an old like 70s one, into a Neve preamp, and I'm pretty sure into Jon, we didn't use, I don't know if you're still here, we didn't use the SM7 on this record, did we? We used the U87. I swear we used the U87. Oh, we might have used the SM7, actually. I don't remember. Honestly, they sound so close. It's like a stupid comparison sometimes, which you'd think that, you know, a $300 mic wouldn't sound that the same. Oh, we used SM7. Wait, no SM7 or no, we used an SM7? Oh, only U87. Okay, so we used a vintage U87 across this entire record into a Neve clone called the AML with it's a 1073 clone, so it has an EQ and everything on it. Half through the record, we thought we were using the vintage one and it was the new one. That's pretty funny. So we used the regular U87 AI on this record. Sounds great though. Doesn't matter. Great mic. If you're spending that much on a mic, it's going to sound good. I mean, you hope so. Anyways, U87 into Neve Pre into a Blue Stripe Hairball 1176. That's my go-to chain when I'm using a U87 on vocals. If I use an SM7 on vocals, I swap out the Blue Stripe 1176 for a distressor because of the noise floor. If you didn't have your 87 and had to use a budget vocal mic, 100%. I only use 2 microphones on vocals, and I don't use the 87 because it's expensive or anything. I literally just use whatever sounds better on the vocalist. And 50% of the time I use an SM7B. The other 50% of the time I use a U87. It's almost divided right down the middle. SM7B is hands down the best vocal microphone you can buy for its price. It works on everybody. And if you get a cloud lifter for it, which I don't even have, you can use it on delicate vocals. You could even use it on acoustic guitar, and it sounds awesome. SM7B is the best mic. I wouldn't get an equivalent LDC unless I was recording a lot of acoustics. Then I would maybe buy something with a transformer in it. I would probably buy like the, what is that? Aston Audio, but the one with the transformer. It's a little bit more money, but I used the transformerless one, and it was boring as hell, and I hated it. So I like transformers in LDCs if I get them, and then I like the SM7 if I don't want to use an LDC. What are your thoughts on different 1176 clones? I've owned every 1176 clone and a real 1176 Rev D, or Rev F, actually. I love the aggression on the Blue Stripes. I like saturation. I'm going to go in my mix and add a bomb of saturation anyways. I'd rather just rock with it on the way in. In fact, even though I'm using an SM7 here, I'm actually compressing my vocals through my Blue Stripe 1176 right now. I never tried any other Blue Stripe clones. I've only ever tried a real Blue Stripe and the Hairball. And they're indistinguishable to me, especially my Hairball. I don't know what it is. It's got some vibe. I love it. Excuse me. I've owned the Rev D Hairballs as well, the 500 series ones. They were... Excuse me again, geez. They were awesome. They were such fantastic compressors. If I want that sort of compression, I'll go for the distressor because it's cleaner, and I like the characteristic that the Blue Stripe adds. I also have 2 Rev F 1176s here, real Universal Audio ones. The 2 1176 it's called. It's my studio partners, and it's awesome. Very clean version of an 1176. Can't screw anything up with it. It's basically the distressor of 1176s, and it's awesome. I just like blue stripes because, like I said, I like that extra character. In fact, I'll use the SM7 through the Rev F1176s sometimes if I do want that FET sort of like fastness. But yeah, the reason I went with Hairball, I think at the time was budget. I obviously couldn't. The reviews said they were great, and I couldn't afford. I've had the Hairballs for maybe like 8 years now, and not a lot of clone companies are doing blue stripes at the time. Yeah, and that was sort of the reason I went with Hairballs. Yeah, they are great. All right, guys. That is a very long list by Northbound. If you like what you checked out today, please subscribe. I'm trying to do these twice a week, but obviously my schedule's kind of picking back up a little bit slowly, so they're kind of breaking down to once a week. It was the reason I didn't do one last week. I was just very busy with some other stuff. Hopefully going to do another one Thursday or Friday this week. If not, I will definitely be doing one next week. Yeah. Check out Northbound, Instagram, Northbound FL. The record we did was called Soul Kiss, and it's just got vibes, man. It's Vibe City. Yeah. Thanks again, guys, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.